This all started when my mother and I moved into a new home. Well, not new, but new to us. Anyway, it wasn't that old, about 30 years old. This was back in 1987. We moved in with not a problem, but I started to notice things about this house. Things would go missing, only to be found days or months later in the same spot. I'd see darts of movement out of the corner of my eye, and when I was alone, it felt like I wasn't. I spent a lot of time alone in the house, which was fine until dark came. Then the house would not feel so warm and inviting as it was in the day, but nothing ever came of it. Until many years later, when the footsteps started in the kitchen, they would come to the living room carpet and stop. As the time wore on, this came closer and closer until one night I was lying awake in bed, like most children do. They began to walk up my stairs to my room, and I know it wasn't my mom. I could hear her snoring downstairs. Now, don't say it was the house settling, because my stair made a very distinct squeak when someone walks up them. Anyway, once they reach the top of the stairs, I peek, being curious and all, and see a shadow standing at the door to my room. I froze, and a few seconds later, it turned around and it began its descent down the stairs. This happened once in a while, but only during stressful times in the house. The shadow itself looked like an average male, with nothing really standing out, but when he looked at me, it was a mixture of complete terror and a strange comfort, like he wasn't there to hurt me or scare me. Like I said, I see him once in a while checking on me, but eventually, he became a part of my life. The one that did scare me lived in the basement. Again, it was a man as far as I could tell. He was very angry, and his feeling was felt through the basement air. You could actually feel it as he walked into the basement, that this was just the beginning of him. Mostly, he would just sit in the corner and glare at you, as he did whatever you had to do, and he always kept as far away from you as possible. It's weird because you would see him move as you move, which was at the time very scary. Even though I was a very brave child, I rarely finished my choir there, even in the daytime. Eventually my mom refused to go down there anymore, after she was tripped by something and fell and broke a couple of toes. As time went on and on, the basement became less and less used, to the point in which the activity was too much that we couldn't even handle it. We were even too scared to even use the laundry. But after a while, we forgot about the guests downstairs, until one night, when we heard a loud whoosh. We looked at each other in terror, as we knew something was wrong in the basement, and we would have to see what it was. So, we braved the basement to see a water pipe had broken, which in itself wasn't weird, but it was the fact that old cherished family photos and items that had previously been on a shelf across the basement were under this pipe that broke. My grandfather soon came over to help fix the pipe and clean up the inches of water. Everything was ruined. The drywall, the shelves, not to mention all the priceless family photos. When we finally cleaned out everything, the last thing to go was the aforementioned shelf, behind which we found a drawn chalk, a pentagram of sorts, and various other strange drawings in a large wooden Ouija board, which again was strange because my mom had never owned one in her entire life, and I was too young to even think about that stuff. Anyway, fast forward 12 years to 2002. My mom had met a great guy and had moved to another town to be with him, and I was moving out too, so I could live on my own. I was just staying in the house until my apartment was ready, which was 2 weeks away, and cleaning the house for the next owners. Our other housemate had stopped making his presence known many years ago, except for the glaring he did in the basement, and it was the furthest thing from my mind, and I was down to the last 3 boxes of stuff in the basement. In the basement there was 4 lights. Every time I came back for a box, one light was burnt out. As I went to get the last box, and I see I'm down to one last light, I know what's coming, but I need that box. So, I grabbed the box and stood up and looked in horror to see him standing in the darkness in his favorite spot. 2 things I noticed this time. He was huge, standing around 6'4", and something I never noticed before. He had red eyes, and it seemed like he had a nasty smile on his face, but I wasn't sure. I stared at him for what seemed like an eternity, but he did the strangest thing ever. He waved to me, but I didn't stick around to say my goodbyes, and somehow managed to shrink the run, yelling some very colorful language as I stumbled out the door. I jumped in my car and sped off, and I looked in the rearview mirror to see him standing in the kitchen, glaring out the window at me. Well, needless to say, I never went back. An interesting side note, the previous owners had been avoiding the Ouija board player, and said that they knew of the entity I'd spoke of. He only identified himself as Jay, and never answered questions about who he was and what happened to him. They said he was fun to talk to until he moved in. Well, thanks for telling us now. This happened about 4 years ago, when I was 15. I was working at a farm in Connecticut at the time, and it was a habit for myself and my coworkers to have nighttime barbecues throughout the summer. On this particular occasion, we had killed 3 of the chickens we had and grilled them, nothing better than fresh chicken. As the night was winding down and we were getting ready to clean up, I noticed a very potent, sweet smell. To note, we were next to a sugar shack where maple syrup is made, and this smell was much stronger than the strongest syrup I've ever smelled. As I smelled it, I noticed my friend glance at me with a perplexed look on his face, and suddenly, a very thick fog drifted in. He got up quickly and declared, "We're leaving now." We of course left, leaving everything to be cleaned up the next day. We went into the farm office, and the fog was still there, along with the smell. It seemed to have followed us. I was a bit spooked, as I knew my friend was experiencing what I was, but the woman had no idea why we started acting strange, and was a bit confused at the sudden rush to leave. As we were leaving, it seemed as if the fog was thickening. However, when we reached a chain link fence, that is the border of the farm, the fog stopped abruptly. I looked out and saw that the fog followed the length of the fence, which was about 50 yards. We left and proceeded to the woman's house, and my friend told her to walk in her house backwards. My friend comes from Ghana in South America and is very superstitious. His grandfather had been a voodoo doctor of some sort. I heard numerous stories of him healing crazed people who talked in odd languages. Anyways, apparently, she did not walk in her house backwards, as we found out the next morning. However, when he told me to, when he dropped me off home, I did so, with no argument, knowing that sometimes you just don't ask why people tell you to do things. My friend picked me up for work the next morning, and I asked him, why did he even make me walk in backwards? He mentioned the smell in the fog, and said if it was a supernatural presence, it would not follow you into your house if you faced it, because it would think you knew it was there. We got to work, and the girl was there before us, and she looked very disheveled and tired. She immediately said she barely slept because things in her house kept falling and waking her up all night. She even said her door opened twice that night. She then said how it was odd how she had smelled something sweet and seen the fog, and then strange things happened to her. My friend and I had not said anything to her about the smell or the fog the previous night, or yet that morning, so we both looked at each other in amazement. She noticed and told us to tell her what happened to us, but instead of telling her that we had the same experience, my friend just asked her if she had walked in her house backwards. She said no. We can only guess why the strange happening went on in only her house and not ours. My name is Sherry, and I live in Loves Park, Illinois. Loves Park is located right outside of Rockport. Well, about 4 months ago, I moved into an apartment with my boyfriend, which is located off of Perry Road. There are the 3 of us who live there: Bill, my boyfriend, Adrian, his son, and myself. All of us have the same encounters with some kind of presence. Adrian is 15 years old and has called us hysterical by things he has witnessed while he was home by himself. Adrian's experience. One day, while home alone in the apartment, Adrian was on the computer. He said that Bill and my bedroom door opened and closed by itself. All windows and doors were closed at the time, so there was not a draft moving through the rooms. About a week later, he was home alone again. There was a knock on the door. Adrian went to the door, and no one was there. He has also seen gray blurs run from the bedrooms to the laundry room. Noises have also come from the kitchen while he was by himself. Bill and Adrian's experiences. In August of 2003, we had family over. While sitting there, Adrian and Bill were staring off towards the bedroom. All of a sudden, they both looked at each other and said, "Did you see that?" They claimed they saw what looked like an old man or woman, hunched over, running, and looking towards them into the laundry room. My experiences pretty much consisted of only hearing noises, like things in the kitchen opening and closing on their own, and blinds rustling with nobody around. That was until 2 nights ago. 2 nights ago, my mom and younger brother came over to visit. We played Uno and watched some TV. After they left, I got online and Adrian and Bill went outside and took the go-kart and mini bike for a ride to Rock Cut State Park. I was just sitting at the computer looking at items on eBay when I started to feel like I was being watched. I looked around and didn't see anything, but I was uncomfortable, so I went and got my cell phone out of my purse. By the way, they all left at around 12:30 a.m. Anyway, I walked back over to the computer and set the phone next to me. I continued my search on eBay when I saw something out of the corner of my eye. I immediately looked over towards the hallway, and standing between the bedrooms and the laundry room, I saw a grayish figure of a man. A shiver of ultimate fear shot down the back of my neck. I've never been that frightened in my entire life. He stood there for about 2 seconds and then disappeared into the laundry room. I grabbed my phone and bolted out the front door. I tried to call Bill on his phone, but he didn't answer. I remained in the front porch until he called me and said he was on his way home. When they got home, I told them what happened, and they said, "Now do you believe us?" I always believed, in a way, but now that I actually saw this thing, I know it's real, and it still frightens me. The ghost, however, has not harmed us in any way. He is just sharing our residence. I'm not sure exactly where to start. All my life, I had feelings and happenings around me. Some I remember, and some are still a bit hazy to me. I have a couple of true stories that have happened to me that I would like to share with everyone. I grew up in a small city in California called Pico Rivera, but moved in '92 to Colorado. Growing up in Cali, I've had 3 sisters and my mom and dad. The house we lived at was on Maris Avenue, and from what I was told, it was originally the first church in Pico Rivera, but was torn down to make a home for an elderly couple who, I believe, the husband died of old age. Their house was torn down and ours was built. I was 8, I believe, when I really started to understand what I was experiencing. I remember that I would always see horrid faces on the wood paneling in the house. By that I mean on the doors and the kitchen cupboards. I remember that my older sister and I would be the only ones to experience all the happenings. Her and I would have recurring nightmares. I would dream of trying to run away from what I believed to be the devil chasing me, but the more I ran, the closer he would get. My sister would dream of a young girl in a checkered red and white dress trying to kill her. Every night, I would hear the same things, stomping on a roof or a stampede of running feet right above my head, and just as fast as it would start, it would disappear. One day, I was alone in the house. My parents and sister had gone to the store, and my 2 older sisters were at work. I was peacefully watching TV and playing with our cat Midnight when a feeling of being watched came over me. Thinking absolutely nothing of it, I went on watching TV, but noticed that Midnight had run off somewhere. I thought it was odd that she had just run off, but I still didn't care. I just kept on watching my cartoons. My mom has a habit of putting this plastic rug thing on our carpets to keep the dirt off, and we had one, so if someone was walking on it, you could hear them. So, What I started to hear was what I thought the cat running back and forth, so I yelled out her name to get her kitty butt over to me and stop making all that noise. When I heard her meow from behind the sofa, I found this strange, wondering how she did that so fast, so I went behind the sofa to take a look. Sure enough, she was huddled in the corner, hissing and meowing with her eyes wide open. I of course tried to get her out, but she wouldn't even let me get near her. I left her alone and figured that she would come out when she's good and ready, and went back to my TV. Then, all of a sudden, I heard the noise in the hall again. I put my TV on mute, thinking that maybe it was the cartoon I was watching, and the noise stopped for a second, but then went back right to it. I started to listen really carefully, and what it sounded like was footsteps, heavy footsteps. With this, I decided to do the same my cat was doing, so I hid in a little tiny opening that was behind her sofa, and I listened very carefully. Then I noticed that whatever it was making, that noise stopped, as if it knew that I was aware it was there. I could feel my heart beat in my throat, and then it started up again, but this time it was faster, and then the doors and windows were opening and slamming shut. I really did not know what to do. I just remembered that I was concentrating on how close the passes were, and they were coming closer to me with every beat of my heart, until I couldn't hear it on the plastic anymore. My cat took off from behind the sofa, so I took it as a sign, and did the same thing, and ran out my front door screaming, thinking that whatever it was would grab me from behind. I made it safely outside my home, and I sat on the sidewalk, waiting for someone to come home. I felt something burning a hole in the back of my neck, and when I turned back to my house, the front door slammed shut. Finally, my parents came home, and I was so happy to see them. My mom scolded me for being outside alone, and so I proceeded to tell them what had happened. My dad said that it was probably an aftershock or a small earthquake, but none of the neighbors experienced anything. My mom, on the other hand, said that I was being punished for being a naughty kid. A few days later, my older sister had come home from work to an empty house, and she experienced the same thing. Our home out here in Colorado has a strange feeling to it. I can't describe it. It's just something that always has been there. I remember one night, it was myself, my neighbor, and my twin sister were home alone. My parents had gone up to the hill for some gambling, so we decided to watch movies and just be the normal teenage kids. Well, my sister had gone in the shower, and my neighbor and I were just sitting around gossiping, waiting for my sister to get out so we could watch a movie, when the phone rang. Of course, I ran to pick it up, and I said hello, but the other side was dead. So, I put it back down and went back to our business. When it rang again, I got up, ran to the phone. Again, no one on the other end. I hate prank calls, and two is enough to get me agitated with, so I unplugged all the phones in the house and left it at that. About 5 minutes later, there was a knock at our door. Now, I wasn't a stupid girl. I looked out the peephole, and there was no one there, so I looked out my window, and there wasn't even any footprint in the snow coming up to our door. Well, we both found this to be strange, and the feeling a bit uncomfortable. We went around the house, making sure everything was locked, and covered all our windows. We stood looking out the front window, making sure it wasn't one of our neighbors trying to play games, when my sister came out of the shower and had a confused look on her face. We asked her what was wrong, and she asked us if we had gone into the bathroom during the time she was in the shower. I told her no, there's no way for us to even get in if we wanted to, because there's no key for that lock. Again, we asked her what was wrong, and she proceeded to tell us that before she got in the water, she took off her rings and placed them on top of the toilet seat cover so they wouldn't fall into the sink, but when she had gone out, they were on top of the toilet and the seat cover was up as if someone had removed them to use the restroom. At the same time, both the phone rang and there was another knock at the door. We looked out the peephole while my sister ran to the phone. Again, there were no footprints in the fresh snow and no one at the door. My sister came running and said that it was for me, so I started walking to the phone when I remembered that I unplugged all the phones, so I told my sister to hang it up. She said that it sounded important, but I told her to hang it up. Finally, she did. My neighbor and I both turned white, and my sister asked what was going on when I told her I unplugged them, so there is no way they could have rang, let alone anyone talk on the other end. We still talk about this to this day, and even in my own apartment, I wake up to hear my toilet flush on its own, or things vanish, and I find them in my cupboards. Crazy, crazy. About 2 years ago, my first love was shot to death and died instantly. I was devastated when it happened, but one night, he came to me in a dream and told me he loved me and he didn't want to see me cry over him anymore because it hurt him. It was really strange because I woke up immediately after that and I just started crying so hard, but I only cried for a few minutes because I remembered what he said and I stopped. I didn't want to hurt him. I remember the dream feeling so real that when he held and kissed me, I felt so safe and secure, like he was really there with me. I never really cried over him again after that day. Sure, a few tears here and there when I visit his grave, but I never cried uncontrollably again. I never forgot about him, but I moved on and tried to make happiness in my life without him. Then a few days ago, a really good friend of my mother's came to visit us for Thanksgiving. Now, I never knew this before, but she has the power to feel the presence of ghosts and spirits. She can talk to them, hear and see them. She was scared to tell my family about this gift because she thought we'd call her crazy. Finally, she just couldn't take it anymore because she said we had a ghost in the house that was influencing my thoughts when I would sleep. She said it was a man, and he lived in my room, and his favorite place was at the foot of my bed. I was a little skeptical at first, because I had never had that sort of thing before. I asked if she could see and hear him, and she said yes. She told me that he had black hair, sharp brown eyes, olive skin, a mustache, and he was about 5'8". The way she described the man sounded exactly like Raymond, my deceased lover. She asked me who that was, and I told her the story. She got this freaked out look on her face, and then I asked her how long this man had been living in my room. She said that before I could even finish the question, he answered me, 2 years, and she repeated this answer to me. I then got goosebumps all over, and I said, he passed away in 2001. She asked me if I had any pictures of him, and I showed her one. She only glanced at it when she said, that's him. I still don't know if I believed it, but I was freaked out by the thought of a ghost living in my bedroom for 2 years. She said she had asked him what he was doing in my home, and he replied that he loved me and was there because of me. She then told me that since he was my ghost, I was the only one who could make him leave. She told me to light a white candle and tell him to go to the lights and that God was waiting for him in heaven. I felt like a lunatic talking to myself, but I did as she said, and then I left my room with all the lights off and the door shut and nothing but the candlelight on. She went into my room about an hour later and she saw him standing there. She then asked him, "What are you still doing here?" He told her that he couldn't go to heaven because he's done too much bad in his lifetime and God will never forgive him. She assured him that wasn't true and said that God loves all of us and will always forgive us no matter what we do, as long as we ask for his forgiveness. She then told him to think about that because God is waiting for him, and she left the room. About an hour after that, I returned home and we went to check if he was still there. Sure enough, he was there at the foot of my bed. I told her that I wanted to talk to him and asked him why he was there. Raymond was a gang member and was killed by the cops for reasons unclear to me at the time. I just knew that he was too good of a person and had too big of a heart to have done anything to deserve death. I never really had a sense of closure regarding his cause of death, and I felt the real story was being hidden and no one would ever find out what really happened. Only the people who were there knew his death. Well, he started out talking about a teen named Joey that had gotten killed about a week before Raymond. He said that he wanted to know that he had never hurt Joey, but Joey had tried to hurt him with a blade of some sort. Raymond's uncle Eddie, who was a gang leader, ordered the gang to go after Joey, who was from a rival gang. They did, and they shot him to death. Raymond said he had nothing to do with Joey's death, but that Joey's ghost had come for Raymond to get revenge on his uncle Eddie. Raymond said he was done wrong by his own family because his uncle Eddie and Aunt Christian knew that Raymond was going down, and they never warned him or said anything to anyone to help him out. They just let him die. I didn't really understand what he meant by this, since he said he was killed by the cops and not a rival gang member. But I knew it was really him because of all the names he had said. I knew that my mom's friend could never have just known those names or made them up, and for the most part, it made sense, except for the part about his aunt and uncle knowing that it was going down. They were both present when he was killed though, so maybe that had something to do with what he said. He said that they had betrayed him and they were no longer his family because family wouldn't have done that to him. He just wouldn't tell me exactly how they did him wrong or what they knew that they never warned him about. He said he was very hurt to find out that two people he had cared so much for had done such a heartless thing to him. He said he just wanted to know this so I would know that he didn't deserve to die and he would never hurt anyone or tried to hurt anyone, that he was set up by his own uncle and aunt. He also said that if his friend had known what was going on, he would have still been alive today. Leia, my mother's friend, couldn't make out the name of the friend he was talking about, so he said, the one with all the kids. Right then, I knew he was talking about my best friend Javier. He said he only told me all of this so I would know the truth and would never think of him as a bad person. What he didn't know was that I never did think of him as a bad person, and I knew, deep down inside, that he didn't deserve to die the way he did, or at the time that he did. Before he passed away, we were going through a lot of problems because he had cheated on me with another woman. He told me that she really never meant a thing to him, but that she threw himself at him, and guys will be guys. He said that we were supposed to get back together and get a house together, and I was supposed to leave his son. He said he wasn't ready to go yet, and he had plans for us, and that was why he chose to stay with me all this time. He just felt comfortable with me there. Leia had told me that since he died so suddenly, he never knew he was dead, and therefore had not crossed over yet, and had been trapped here on Earth. He said that he never meant to hurt me in any way, and that I was his true love. What was really weird was about a year ago, 2002, I had a new boyfriend living with me, and he broke my heart. I still get sad about him and miss him occasionally, and Raymond knew this. One of the last things he had asked Leia to tell me was that the man I was so heartbroken over wasn't even worth my time or tears, and that he could just never be good enough for me, so not to hurt over him anymore. He said he didn't like that guy, and that he never deserved me. He was just no good. Well, he was so right about everything he had told me in that whole conversation. At the time, I didn't know it for sure, but I just felt it inside, and I knew he wouldn't stay around for 2 years just to tell me lies. After he told me all of that, he said he didn't want to talk anymore because I should be able to figure out everything from what he already said. Leia and I then asked him to go to light and go with God. I promised him I'd pray for him to be forgiven by God and led into heaven, but I already knew God would take him without my prayer. Just then, Leia's eyes moved across the room, as if she was watching someone walking. He said one last time, "Please tell her that I never meant to hurt her, and I'm so sorry." I said I forgave him a very long time ago. He then asked me to tell me that he loved me and would wait for me in heaven. Then Leia told me to watch the candle, and just at that moment, the flame grew very tall, and the blue of the flame disappeared, and it was all white. She told me he said goodbye, "I love you," and he was gone. He just wanted to tell me those things, and wouldn't leave until he got the chance. I felt really happy after that, because I sent my love to heaven, where he belongs. This is a true story, and it was honestly the best experience of my entire life, which isn't too long, since I'm only 19. Even though I couldn't see him or hear him, I knew for a fact that he was right there with me, just from what he said and all the names he mentioned. I know I will never experience anything like this again, so I feel very special that he chose me. It really was crazy to go through that, but once I knew it was him, I wasn't so scared anymore. I actually felt happy that he stayed all that time, just to tell me how he felt and what really happened when he passed away. I felt even happier that I was the one who had sent him to heaven to be with God and be happy again. It may not make sense to you, but it did to me, because he was my first love and I knew him so well. I tried to follow his case and dig to find something on what really happened when he was killed, but never could, up until he told me. Soon after that experience, I spoke to his mother, and we put the whole thing together to find out that his family had betrayed him, just as he said. His Uncle Eddie is now standing trial for the death of Joey, and he is looking at 25 to life with no chance of parole. But for what he did to Raymond, he deserves that. He actually deserves to be the one laying in that casket instead of Raymond. But I'm just glad Raymond is in a better place and away from this cruel world. He deserves to be happy for eternity. This happened over a span of time from June, my last visit on October 31st. When I first did a search in the Amity Hall Hotel in April 2003, I read about how back in the days of the PL canal system, canal travelers used to stay there. Then in the Civil War days, it was used as a hospital. Then only internet, which I thought odd. I've looked on the internet many times for historical information on Amity Hall. The first time I went there was June. My friend had been telling me about it, so we went with a group. I brought my camcorder and was outside with a girl that was scared to go in. My battery went dead in about 5 minutes. I thought it was weird because a relative had put the battery in the charger while running the camera off of house electricity, but later the battery charged and now it's just fine. That night we saw, in the corner of the L-shaped building, very small bluish lights. They went inside but reported nothing out of the ordinary. The first time I went into the house, 1 week later, was during the day. I'd wandered around it many times, during both day and night, and the most creepy place on the outside is a door at the end of a hall, which is locked shut. We, me and that same friend, were walking around it, looking for a door that was open, and I went around front and was standing on the porch, looking at the door. It was completely shut, and suddenly, which seemed odd to me, I had the notion to try it. It seemed ridiculous, especially because it had always previously been locked, but I reached for it, and it easily swung open, revealing to me the beauty within. There is a hall that runs down the middle of it, on either side, very large rooms. There is a bar on the left, and a kitchen beyond that. There are old fireplaces in the rooms. The L shape to this building comes from the attachment of the hallway of hotel rooms to what I assume is the residential part, as well as the kitchen. Strangely, the worst in the house is upstairs, the trophy room. This room is filled with a giant feeling of get out of here. Nothing has ever been seen or heard in it by me, but I went in it once, and I'll never go in it again. That is how strange the feeling is. I'm not sure if the anger felt in this room is some ghost. All the glass and mirrors are broken, and you walk on a crystalline floor about an inch thick. We were walking around and checking the doors. We opened the heavy metal black door and were lingering around in a small awkward room. I looked down the hall into an ominous darkness and said, "I'm not going down that hallway." We kept checking other doors and came, not by my request, back to the door. When I looked down the hallway this time, it was well lit and I could see everything. There is a small rectangular window in front of the front door at the other end of the hall that let in a great deal of light, but before this could not be seen. Before, I couldn't even see halfway down the hallway because it was so dark. We continued around checking doors because we didn't want to climb around the fallen antique soda machine that lays at an awkward angle, stuck between the steps themselves and the railing of the upper part of the staircase. It looks like it's ready to fall. We went to the door right in front of the stairs, which was locked before, and my friend, for whatever reason, reached out and opened it. She was also very determined to get into the hotel rooms, so we were climbing across the little porches, separated by railings, and after we already tried all the doors, she, without rhyme or reason, walked right up to the third one in and opened it with ease. Throughout the summer, we went back with equipment trying to get footage, but nothing works correctly around it. I've seen, one night, the very faint white figure of what appeared to be a woman in the attic window facing the parking lot. I've seen white flashes of light in the attic windows facing the road, but the worst time ever, I'm getting goosebumps and watery eyes thinking about it, was October 11th. It wasn't that cold, but I remember wearing my winter jacket. Me, my best friend since childhood, and my boyfriend went driving up. We talked all about it on the way there, and then we parked. We just couldn't bring ourselves to get out of the car. For some reason, we were all scared to death. That night, there seemed to be a battle going on of energies, good and evil, because believe me, the place has both. You could, at times, actually see in the window the swirling of something that is hard for me to describe as anything other than something out of this world. There were faint glows fading in and out of the windows, as well as small but somewhat bright points of light coming from the corner of the L shape. The driver, my best friend, got out of the car and basically was so scared she just stood there and then quickly got back in. I'd heard of the hounds of hell, chasing people from sitting in the parking lot like we were. Maybe that's what she saw. I don't know. I was watching the house, but suddenly, my boyfriend in the passenger seat freaked out and pointed to the front left corner of the car, and just as he did, I was suddenly scared. I cried a scream that came straight from my soul. Go now. We spun out of the parking lot and parked on the other side of the road. Each time the car was still running. My boyfriend was talking about what he saw, which was a black figure, not the shape of a dog, but about the size of a dog, lingering around the front bumper where the driver was standing. We were talking about how still, from this far away, the house felt creepy and strong. This may sound weird to some, but I don't care. I was sitting in the back seat on the right side, the side of the car that was facing the woods. Suddenly, I got this creepy feeling that something was outside the window. I knew it was watching me. In the front, my friends were talking, and just as I was turning to look out the window, in a split instant, my boyfriend, the passenger, started freaking out, screaming the driver's name, and to start driving. I was, somehow, too slow for this. The timing was just about right, that I never got to see with eyes what I already knew to be there, just outside the window, not just watching, but glaring at me. I hadn't even began to describe what I experienced when suddenly it started coming from my boyfriend's mouth. He was trembling and telling about how something was outside my window, looking in at me, and it wanted to hurt me. He said there was a woman outside his window, silently screaming at him, which is why he screamed. I started crying and going into near hysterics because what he was describing was what I felt, and at the height of my terror, he was the one who freaked out. It was one of the most horrific paranormal experiences I've ever had. He said he could clearly see her, and that it looked like the female was bleeding a lot, and that her clothes were from the 1800s. The last time I was there, October 31st, it seemed like respectful party people had taken up part-time residence in the house because furniture had been all moved to one room, and there was no further damage to the house. I later found out that several of my friends went later, and the house is now inhabited by a cult of some sort. They have told me that they spoke with someone. Whatever the case, I don't think I'll ever go back at night. There's something there that is anchored with me for some reason. I'm still looking for history to figure out who the woman and man were outside of my car. I would appreciate any ideas you might have for why the male gave off the feeling towards some and no one else in the car. My boyfriend is also wondering the same thing about the mail. To be honest, I don't think I'll ever go ghost hunting anymore either, because I've been so frightened by the above events. Well, I know loads of people send in stories about graveyards, and they never sound true, but this one I encountered was so scary, I didn't want to go out of my house for 5 months. Basically, my two friends, Ursula, Nikita, and I, were sitting on the wall of this graveyard we used to hang out in when I decided to take a visit to my friend, who is dead, in the cremation garden and have a talk to her. Nikita and Ursula knew I liked to spend time on my own, so they left me to it. After all, they were still in view. Well, Asher, my dead friend's flowers were dying, so I went into the back of the graveyard to pick some flowers. Then, all of a sudden, I heard a voice. I thought nothing of it at first, just a hush cooing in the background. I presumed it was some mourner coming to visit a loved one, but it started to get louder and more distressed. The person sounded Latin. They were getting louder and louder until it hurt my ears, and I had to turn around and tell them to stop. But then, when I turned around, nothing was there. I strained my eyes, but all I could see was a graveyard and flowers. Quite startled by the experience, I decided to tell Urs and Keats about what just happened. Then I heard a scream. Things were getting stranger and stranger. I was scared now. I ran and ran, but my surroundings were unfamiliar. I hadn't a clue where I was. I couldn't find my way out of this whirling blur that I was trapped in, and the Latin voice was getting louder and louder. All of a sudden, I appeared to wake up. I was in the middle of the graveyard in the pitch black. I panicked like you would. I was so utterly confused. I looked up to see a blurred figure, and I screamed. The figure was about my height and my size, but it had no face. It was nothing. It was just there. And as I stared at it, it came closer and closer until I was practically inside it. And it stopped dead in front of me. And then the Latin voice came back. Quiet at first, but louder it grew, louder and louder. I let it. The next thing I knew, the figure was fading and fading into nothing, until that's all it was, just nothing. Eventually, police found me and rushed me to the hospital. They said it was just my anxiety hallucinating me, but I'm sure it was something more, something that won't leave my head. You see, every night when I go to bed, I say a Latin prayer and hope that the figure I see will rest in peace, but that didn't stop it from scaring the hell out of me. Please make sure you don't wake up at exactly 3:12, because I do, and I hate it. I see the figure at the foot of my bed, with a face and everything. She's a little girl, and she screams, silently, but she still does it, and it scares me. She hasn't hurt me yet, though. When I was 14, my family moved to Seattle, where my father was to do some teaching. We rented a beautiful old house. From the time we moved in, I was uncomfortable. I would turn quickly to think I saw someone move, just out of sight. I was placed in a downstairs room, which seemed to have the largest amount of activity. And each night, my dog would awake, barking at what seemed to be nothing, and my cat would become very alert. I eventually moved myself upstairs, into my baby brother's room, and he was sleeping with my parents. One day, while my father was away on business, my mother and I heard what sounded like a large box drop. We all looked around the house and found nothing to have made the noise. Because I was so scared, I asked to spend the night with my mother. I was to sleep that night in my brother's bed, and my brother would sleep with my mom. My mother and I were facing each other, me with my back to the closet. We said goodnight and turned out the light. A moment later, my mother bolted upright. Startled, I said, "What is it?" She told me to be quiet and reached into the nightstand for some mace. I turned to see what she was looking at. Out from the closet came light, as though someone had switched on a light. There was no light in the closet. We looked through the closet and through the house for 2 hours and found nothing. I remember my mom saying, "Don't worry, it's just a ghost. It won't hurt you." She was right. It never did, but I continued to feel uncomfortable and see what I think was a woman until we finally moved from the house. In another incident, in 1990, my grandfather was in a retirement home. He had several strokes and could no longer talk. His hearing was always bad, but had gotten to the point that he could no longer hear. He had recently come down with shingles and was not doing well. That night, as I was drifting off to sleep, I clearly hear my grandfather talking to me. He told me he loved me and then said goodbye. The following morning, I got a call saying he was dead. I already knew. There was another incident that has haunted me to this day. My husband, 2 kids, and myself took a trip to Alaska last summer. We made it to the border of Canada somewhere around 8 in the evening. We were told that the nearest town was a place called Hope, about 30 miles up the road. When we got to the town, we found that there was no place to stay. It seems it was a national holiday. A kind woman at a local hotel phoned the next town up the road to see about vacancies. She reserved a room for us, and off we went. We reached the Yale Hotel around 10 o'clock and checked into our room. I turned on the TV for the kids, and they watched the Family Channel until we were ready for bed. We turned out the lights and went to sleep. Sometime later, the TV awakened me. It had turned on by itself. What was showing appeared to be a sitcom. What was being said was far from funny. It seemed as though the voice was dubbed. What was said did not even match the mouth movements. It was a man smiling and talking to his wife in a kitchen. What I heard was a man with a rough voice, screaming. My husband had woke up with me and asked why I had turned on the television. When I told him I didn't, he asked that I turn it off. I accidentally switched channels, and when I turned the knob back, the show was gone. It was called Just Snow. It's funny, it didn't really dawn on me until the following day how very strange it was. I've never before or since had a television turn on to what was the Family Channel and have it spew profanities at me, but I guess we all have firsts. In my last and final instance, my family and I moved into our house last October. My husband and I had been looking for houses for some time. When we found this house, we loved it from the start. It was a good warm feel, and it really was the best house we could ever have. Shortly after having moved in, my husband and I compared notes and admitted that we were both having strange feelings. Creepy was the word we agreed on. We were both finding the closet in our children's room open. The door would stay closed sometimes, and other times you return to find it ajar or fully opened. My husband shared with me that he was outside doing some digging on the French drain. He had set down a piece of chalk he had found. He turned around to pick it up, and it was gone. On another occasion, my family and I were sitting on the couch. My husband asked me to smell my son's hair, and it smelled intensely of perfume. Being that neither my husband nor myself wear any fragrance, we began looking around for something that may be carrying the scent. To refresh his memory, he sniffed my son's hair again and asked me to do the same. The smell was completely gone. The oddness seemed to subside for months. Then, this year, around the same time, it seems to have started again. The closet door is again not staying closed. We are having trouble finding things again. The other night, I felt a cold breeze coming across my face as though the windows were open, but they were closed. I go up to find the back door unlocked, knowing that I had locked it the night before. A few nights ago, when I closed my eyes, I heard someone saying to me it's all right. After looking up the site and looking at the pictures, I decided to try my hand at photographing the potential presence. I went into the bedroom that has the closet door that doesn't close. I said out loud, though I'm not comfortable with the idea of having a presence in my home, I think I could deal with it better if I knew whether or not you exist, and since I have children, and they would be able to see you if you exist, I feel I need to be aware of that fact. So, I'm going to take pictures of the house, and if you are comfortable having me take your picture, you can get in front of the camera. If you're not comfortable, I can respect that. I'm guessing you're a good entity, because my cat seems to like you. Note, my cat is very insistent on spending time in this room. I must say, I felt a little silly talking to the air, but it seemed the right thing to do. So, I took pictures of the house. I frankly was hoping that nothing would be found, and that I would find my imagination had run away with itself. When I got the pictures back, I found that the photos taken in the bedroom and in the closet have what I understood to be a vortex. Needless to say, I'm pretty spooked. I'm planning on finding out the history of the house to see if I can figure out who our roommate is. Also, I'm hoping to contact some people that are knowledgeable on the subject of ghosts. If this entity needs my assistance, I hope to help. If it just wants to hang out with us, that's fine too. And if it's bad news, I need to know. I'm hoping that my initial feeling of my house is correct, and that what I believe is a ghost is of the non-threatening variety. I just keep telling myself that. The ghost has been very polite for the last year, and those that should be able to sense the presence seem not to mind it. The cats and my two children, whose room the ghost seems to live and spend time in. Thank you for your time, and I'm glad that you were able to read my story. I grew up in a small town in central New Hampshire. When I was 18, one of my friends took me to a grave, which is located on the side of a road. The grave lies off the road, about 10 feet. The grave is that of a young boy named Miles Tyler, who died in 1811. He then told me about some of the experiences he had. I was a little skeptical of the stories. He had said that sometimes you will hear leaves and branches moving, and there is no wind. Also, branches will crack and break. He had also mentioned that if you left food out, it would end up unwrapped and partially or completely eaten, even unopened cans of soda. The next day, I was over to a friend's house and told him of the story, and he also admitted of hearing this and being true. So, we planned a trip up there with a group of friends. One of these people was a girl who was into the ghost and spirit thing at that time. She was into the Ouija board and seance stuff. We arrived there about 11 at night, so this way we wouldn't have any traffic or intrusions by passerbys. The girl and her friends started to try and communicate with the boy who was buried at the grave, while the rest of us watched intensely. There was one person there who was mocking the whole thing, and definitely was a complete non-believer and had no respect for the dead whatsoever. They had made contact with the boy within 2 or 3 minutes of trying. The spirits they were talking to was getting aggravated at the person who had been mocking him. I at that time didn't know what to believe. I just kept watching, my eyes glued on the ever-moving oracle. Soon, we all heard the leaves and limbs rustling in the woods around the grave. We all started to get nervous, while the person who had been mocking this whole event picked up his own pace. This just made things go completely out of control. Now, we could definitely hear the branches breaking, and it started to rain. Suddenly, the guy who had been mocking this whole event was staring at the headstone in complete fear. That's when we all noticed that it had moved. It had tilted to the left at least 2 to 3 inches. That's when we all decided to leave. Me and 2 of my friends jumped in my truck to leave. It wouldn't start. I tried for what seemed like forever, still scared out of my mind. I jumped out of the truck and told my friend to get in the driver's seat. I got out and started pushing the truck down the road. Within 50 feet, the truck started and the rain stopped. So did the wind. We left and never looked back. I haven't been back since. We all stayed up until daylight, and I dropped them off and went home. We were all shaken up by this, and we didn't even talk about that after. That morning, I told my mom what had happened. Funny thing is that she did not say that she didn't believe me, but just chose to say, "I hope you have learned your lesson and don't go back." I'm sorry for the lack of names, but didn't want to involve anyone without their permission. I now live out of state and have lost track of most of them. One summer, when I was about 11 or 12 years old, my parents, my little sister, two of my older sisters, and myself moved into this old gray house in northern Indiana. It had a cement sidewalk that went around to the back of the house, and at the back of the door, there was a date and two footprints and a handprint. The date was about 1812, if I remember correctly. It has been at least 10 years since this has happened. Anyway, right before we moved in, my two older sisters wanted to stay the night at the house, so they did. They felt real uneasy after being there for a while. They sat on the floor, back to back, wishing they hadn't done this. All of a sudden, they heard a loud banging noise coming from the basement. They called the police from the neighbor's house. After the police checked everything out and found nothing, they left. Once again, my sisters, still scared out of their minds, sat on the floor. They heard it again. So once again, they called the police. They showed up and stuck around a while to see if maybe they could hear it. About 15 minutes or so later, they heard it. One of the police officers told them that it was just an old furnace in the basement making noises. My sisters had a good laugh and finally drifted off to sleep. When we finally moved in and settled down, I wanted to really check the place out. In my room there was a walk-in closet about 12 feet in length, and on the left side inside the door was a smaller door that we assumed led to the attic. I felt very odd every time I had to go to the closet. One night, my little sister decided that she was going to sleep in my bed with me. Of course, being the brave sister I was, I picked up my little book of ghost stories and began to read a story entitled Phone Calls from a Ghost. All of a sudden, the light in the hallway began to flicker. It was the light we were using to read the book by. We got scared, and I threw the book out my bedroom door. We laid there talking, wondering what caused that to happen, when we began to hear music and lots of voices coming from the attic. I could hear a child running around and laughing also, but my sister says she didn't hear that. We decided to go downstairs and sleep in her room that night. A few weeks go by, and one of my older sisters bought a Ouija board. My mom didn't like the idea of it being in her house because her mother always told her that they were of the devil. But, being a little curious herself, we all sat down and watched as my mother and older sister began to play the game. The spirit in the board said his name was Ghoul. I'm not sure how it would be pronounced, but I remember how it was spelled. We asked it some silly questions, and then my mom asked it a more serious question about if one of us was going to die, when, and how. The board told her something. She wouldn't tell us. Then she got really mad at the spirit and began calling it names. The little device that you put your hands on began moving around the board really fast in a figure-8 pattern no one was touching. Then it flew off the board and sailed across the front room into the dining room. My mom told my sister to get out of her house and never mention anything about what had happened. But she didn't take it out. She just put it in the closet in my room. One night, me and my little sister decided that we were going to be gypsies. So, we got our crystal ball, which was nothing more than an electric candle with a blue bulb, and sat in the playroom and turned off all the lights. My mom was the only one home, and she was downstairs. We sat next to the candle and began chanting, "Oh spirits, if you are here, give us a sign. We want to know who you really are and why you're here." Over and over we chanted. Just then, I felt this cold chill. The windows were closed and it was midsummer. The bulb in the candle flashed and then went out, and I heard someone whisper, "I'm here." It sounded like a child's voice. Then, the hall light flashed twice and then stayed on for about 5 or 10 seconds and went out. My sister and I ran down the stairs, across the dining room, and into the front room to where my mother was sitting, reading a book. We asked her if she flashed the lights just now, and she said no. See, my mom can't walk very well, She can't run or walk fast either, so she wouldn't have been able to get to the stairwell, flash the lights, and get back to her seat in time before we made it down the stairs. She didn't even notice the lights flash. Needless to say, we didn't go back upstairs. The next weekend, I stayed with my friend Robin. I didn't see anything about what was going on in our house. My mom and little sister were home alone. During the night, my sister woke up because she heard a woman scream. She ran to my mom's room and woke her up and told her. Mom called the police. They showed up, checked everything out. Nothing. After my mom got her calmed down and they both fell asleep, my sister heard the screaming again. So, once again, Mom called the police. They still didn't find anything. I wanted to find out why all this crazy stuff was happening, so I began to ask around. A few of the neighborhood kids got together and helped me find out. Of course, they thought my sister and I were crazy. Then my friend Erin talked to a lady at the library. She told Erin what happened, and then Erin came home to my home to tell me. We were standing outside the house, on the side where my room is below the window, in my walk-in closet. She told me that there was a mom, dad, and child who lived here a long time ago. One evening after school, the little boy was up in his room, which was the same room I had at the time. The mom was standing in the hallway, talking to him, when the dad came home. He was drunk and told him to come down. She looked at the boy and told him not to come down. He could hear his mom and dad yelling, and then all of a sudden, he heard his mom scream, and she just kept screaming. He ran down the stairs and into the kitchen. There was blood everywhere, and his dad was still stabbing her in the chest and stomach. He turned to the boy, and he said, "You're next." He ran up the stairs and locked himself in the attic. The dad took the mother's body and went down to the basement. In the basement, there was a little cubbyhole in the wall. Inside that hole was another hole. He put her in the second cubbyhole and went after the boy. He kicked the attic door open, and when he found the boy, he began stabbing him, little at a time, just enough to make him bleed a little bit. The neighbor heard the boy's screams and called the police. The dad took the boy, still screaming, and went down to the basement and climbed into the second little cubbyhole and finished killing the boy. He then took his own life. After Erin finished telling me the story, I looked up at my window, and it was like I was looking at a family photo. I could see the mom, dad, and boy looking down at me. She was wearing a whitish sweater. The dad was wearing overalls and a plaid shirt, and the boy was wearing a pair of overalls and a plain t-shirt. They looked happy. Then I looked at Erin, who didn't seem to notice them, and then I looked back, and they were gone. After everyone went home, and I could sit and tell my mom about it, who didn't believe me anyway, I began putting things together. The child's voice in the attic, the woman screaming, the banging in the basement. I know it could have been of the furnace. It was the middle of summer, and there wasn't a need for a furnace to be on, so it wasn't in use. I still had the visits from the family, but nothing as bad or as horrible as what they went through when they were alive. I want to start off by saying that this is a great site, and I love reading about everyone's ghostly experiences, even though I must admit I have a hard time believing them all. There's some stories that you can just tell that the person writing it is a kid with an overactive imagination. I only say this because even though I am a believer, I am a college educational rational individual, and I can also be the biggest skeptic you've ever met, which brings me to this incident that occurred while I was still in college. I just want to stress to everyone that's as skeptical as I am, that even though this experience sounds extremely unbelievable, that this is true and it really did happen. I know that this is long, but bear with me. I want to make sure I didn't leave anything out. This experience happened one late night in October in 1994. I was a junior in college at the time and had very little free time to do anything because besides class, I also worked part-time and was very active in my fraternity. Every year, we would have a big Halloween party at one of our fraternity brothers' houses, and just have a completely wild, chaotic night, but nothing can compare to what we all experienced that night. I got to the party shortly after it started, got a beer, and noticed people coming out of the basement. I asked one of the people what was going on down there, and they told me that my friend Jeff had brought his Ouija board to the party and was down there, acting stupid. Apparently, these people didn't know Jeff very well. He took the Ouija very seriously. If anything, he was addicted to it. He constantly used it and kept people in close contact with a spirit named Jack that he contacted through the board. I'd come to learn that Jack wasn't the most pleasant spirit and was a pretty mean individual who had died in prison, but for some reason, Jeff liked conversing with him. I then proceeded down the stairs to see what was going on. There was about 10 people down in the basement. By the way, this was not a finished basement. This was the spooky concrete floors and dust everywhere basement. Jeff and a girl I knew named Lynn were using the board and talking to Jeff. Lynn began getting tired of it. She was just trying to have a good time, and she thought that Jeff was taking the whole thing way too seriously. Before she could get up to go back upstairs, a girl we knew named Dana came down the stairs. As soon as Dana came down into the basement, the board went absolutely nuts, moving around at a frenzied pace. Jeff said that this wasn't like Jack and asked the board what was wrong. The board spelled out that it wasn't Jack, and it just kept spelling Dana's name over and over. Jeff asked the board if the spirit knew Dana, and it said yes. At this point, everyone's kind of looking around confused and everything, and Dana was just looking at the board all weird. Jeff then asked the board what its name was, as it spelled out the name Michael, and that he was 6 years old when he died. This is when Dana went ballistic. She just started crying uncontrollably and shouting, but we couldn't understand her because she was crying so much. She then ran upstairs and out the back door. A couple of us followed her to try and find out what was going on and to try and calm her down. We went outside and saw Dana crying on another girl's shoulder. This other girl looked both pissed off and scared to death at the same time. We asked her what was wrong and started yelling at us. How could you dare pull a mean trick like that? You should feel awful for doing this to her. We were clueless. We asked her what she was talking about, and then she told us that Dana had a younger brother named Michael that drowned when he was 6 years old. A chill immediately went down my spine. Once Dana calmed down a little bit, she told us that she'd been trying to contact Michael over the years, but was never able to. She then offered to buy Jeff's Ouija board from him so he could keep in touch with her brother. At this time, Jack came back, and it was like he and Michael were fighting over control of the board. Jack then told Jeff that if he burned the board that night before midnight, that his soul would be set free and he would be at peace. Jeff immediately wanted to set the board on fire because he said he developed some sort of relationship with Jack and wanted his soul to be at peace. Let's just say Dana didn't like that idea a bit, so they both got into huge arguments and the party became totally chaotic. By this time, everyone at the party, only about 50 people, knew what was going on, and everyone started fighting and yelling, split down the middle, either on Jeff's side or Dana's. Eventually, Jeff snuck outside with a can of lighter fluid and set the board on fire, with Dana standing over it and crying her eyes out. As you can guess, no one was really in the mood to party after that, and everyone ended up either staying at the house the party was at or left for home to get their head back together. After that night, not one person I know that was at this party ever talked about that night again, not even once. I don't know how to explain what happened, but all I know is that there's no way that this was some sort of trick or joke that Jeff and Dana could have played on us. Being the skeptic that I am, to this day, I tried to find out just how they could have pulled this over on us. Dana was just a friend of a friend of a friend that not very many of us knew that well, and that night at the party, none of us knew that she had a brother. Just that one friend of hers at a party that yelled at us knew anything about it. And then there's Jeff. He just takes the occult way too seriously and would never use it as a basis for a joke, and if it was a trick, he's not the type to let it go. He'd make sure he knew it in our face about how much he scared us and what a great joke it was every chance he got. That's just how he is. To this day, anytime I tell anyone about this, when I get to the part that the spirit was her brother, I get a chill all over my body. Words simply can't describe what it is like being that night and what happened, but I'll never forget about it. I can remember it was just like it was yesterday. If anyone wants to write me about this or anything, feel free to. Hey guys, it's Phantom here, and welcome to another edition of a compilation that I did, Best of April, the Fire and Fireplace stories. Hope you guys enjoyed this. Just talking because I'm closing you guys out, and I just want to let you guys know that I exist, and there's a person behind the narration, of course. It's not just some robots, although people like to claim it is. Anywho, thank you so much again, and I'll talk to you in another lifetime, probably the next lifetime, which means the next narration. You guys can comment, you guys can like, you can subscribe, and you can share. But I'm not getting my hopes up because this is the life that we choose, and if we love the life, then we better be, life lovers. Anyway, guys, I don't know what I'm talking about. Thank you so much. Good night, good morning, and I'll see you in the next video. Yeah.